Hi, I'm Dr. Allison Stevens, and welcome to the History Speaks debate. The focus of our discussion today is the nature and the consequences of what happens when federal appropriations lapse. We commonly call it a government shutdown. Our debaters today are Napoleon Bonaparte and Benjamin Franklin. Now, these are not the direct words of Emperor Napoleon I or Benjamin Franklin. Still, they represent their political philosophies from a historically accurate perspective. And the question is a government shutdown a necessary structural defense against executive overreach, or is it just an unacceptable failure of statecraft? This whole mechanism, it arises from legislative deadlock, right? So what we're grappling with is, does this represent a critical, necessary constraint on executive power and spending, a safeguard for liberty and fiscal thrift? Or is it really a catastrophic paralysis that just destroys the state's ability to function efficiently? I stand firmly with the former position. Let's start with opening statements. Mr. Franklin will go first, then Emperor Napoleon I.
I truly believe that the legislative constraint, the one inherent in this appropriations process, it's the most vital safeguard we have against the kind of financial tyranny that, history has shown always follows unauthorized spending. We must prioritize prudence and constitutional checks.
And I naturally argue the exact opposite. The primary imperative, the duty of a great state, is continuous, effective action. This kind of paralysis isn't a safeguard. Frankly, it's administrative destruction. I maintain that the legislature's failure to provide the necessary funds is a fundamental breakdown, one that undermines the required efficiency and execution of state authority.
And what do you say, Mr. Franklin, about government shutdowns as paralysis, not a safeguard?
As I see it, the power of the purse must reside solely and securely with the representatives of the people, period. Any temporary inconvenience, any pause in federal activity, that's merely the necessary price we pay to ensure that the executive branch, no matter how popular or how urgent its aims might seem, cannot obligate the public treasury without explicit legal authorization. History teaches us again and again that the erosion of liberty, it starts with unauthorized debt. My evidence for this system's integrity, it's rooted in the law itself. The Anti-Deficiency Act, the ADA, is our ultimate defensive line. It explicitly prohibits officials from incurring obligations unless an appropriation, which is defined as a provision of law, has specifically authorized it. Now, if an obligation is made illegally, we have the severe penalty mechanism, the unfunded deficiency. It demands immediate liquidation and serves as a harsh deterrence. This isn't some arbitrary complexity. It's the constitutional wall that prevents the executive from, say, running a standing army or a vast permanent bureaucracy outside of public review. Prudence demands this.
Your concern for thrift is laudable, perhaps, but it sounds more like the concern of a controller worried about a ledger entry, not a leader charged with maintaining the actual integrity of the nation. The primary duty of any successful state is continuous command, effective action, and crucially, the maintenance of public confidence. This legislative paralysis that leads to a lapse in funding is, quite frankly, a failure of statecraft. It renders the administration impotent.
But impotence against illegal spending
I am sorry, but I just don't buy that the resulting chaos is some noble exercise in fiscal prudence. The very reality of this failure is detailed in the procedures the executive is forced to draft. These detailed, complex shutdown plans that require agencies to prepare for the orderly termination of agency activities. Orderly termination? That's an oxymoron. It's administrative chaos wearing the mask of caution. When the legislative branch fails, and it is a failure to provide the basic law needed to operate, it forces the executive to survive on weak, fragmented, stopgap measures, the most common being these continuing resolutions, or CRs.
That's an interesting point concerning administrative continuity. But let's look closer at the mechanism you decry, the continuing resolution. You present the CR as purely a failure, yet I would frame it differently. It's a crucial, albeit perhaps clumsy, means of maintaining that legislative check.
Clumsy is one word for it.
The CR, while imperfect, is still a provision of law. It ensures that the executive cannot simply proceed as if it holds some kind of permanent or indefinite spending authority. Furthermore, The system is designed with accountability in mind. Even after funds have been appropriated, we have mechanisms like rescission proposals and the cancellation of unobligated balances. These tools allow Congress to review and, yes, claw back funds it deems unnecessary or unwise. That ability to reclaim funds demonstrates that the purse isn't permanently seated. It's under constant, active review by the people's representatives.
I see why you cling to the notion that the legislature retains control through these measures, but the very nature of the continuing resolution proves the system is inherently unstable and reactive. A CR only grants authority for a short period, sometimes just a few weeks, and critically, it limits obligations based on a simple rate for operations derived from the previous year's budget, not based on current needs or strategy.
It's a baseline, yes.
But the consequence of this cannot be overstated. Limiting funds to a non-strategic baseline, while it cripples the government's ability to execute its mission with the requisite speed. If an agency needs to pivot, maybe launch a critical new cybersecurity initiative, or perhaps retire an obsolete program, the CR prevents it. It freezes the stake in last year's operational posture. It destroys the executive's capacity for strategic foresight and necessary long-term investments. A state cannot command effectively when its budget is always looking backward.
If we accept that administrative uncertainty is perhaps the necessary price of liberty, then we must accept it fully. That leads us directly to the mechanisms designed specifically to impose hard limits, such as the Balanced Budget and Emergency Deficit Control Act, or BBDCA. These enforce statutory spending limits, caps really on discretionary authority. These constraints are absolutely necessary to prevent the uncontrolled accumulation of public debt, which I believe is the gravest burden we can possibly place upon future generations.
Necessary or just cumbersome?
When the legislative will to limit spending falters, we have the blunt, yes, but necessary enforcement tool of sequestration. It is painful, I grant you, but it's an honest, automatic enforcement that forces fiscal sobriety when deliberation fails. We simply cannot allow political expediency to destroy the financial foundation of the state.
I see why you think that such rigid structural limits represent the height of responsibility, but let me offer a different perspective. These complex interlocking fiscal mechanisms, BBDCA, sequestration, the ADA, they don't enforce sobriety. They actively hinder agile and effective management. They force the administrative engine to pivot away from its core mission, governing, and instead focus relentlessly on bureaucratic avoidance of legal violations. Consider the time wasted. Agencies must dedicate highly paid expert personnel to detailing things like character classification and meticulous object class codes for every single expenditure and constantly track potential unfunded deficiencies. This isn't governance. It's elaborate, legally mandated paperwork designed primarily to protect officials from
Yet without these rules, where is the limit? You seem to advocate for a system where the executive is granted effectively open financial authority purely on the basis of presumed administrative necessity. A great state does not require arbitrary financial power. It requires lawful power.
A truly strong state requires continuous functional power. The flaw in your argument, I think, is exposed by the very exceptions you permit. The system itself implicitly acknowledges that government must continue. Even during a lapse, it lists certain activities that must persist. Emergencies involving the safety of human life or the protection of property. Think about air traffic control, border security, servicing the debt. If these functions are truly vital, if they represent the core competency of the state, why on earth is their funding dependent on political whims, on legislative deadlock, on last-minute deals? These critical functions shouldn't be exceptions subject to negotiation. They should be the rule managed effectively by the executive.
I acknowledge that some operations must persist, and the law does provide narrowly defined exceptions. We speak of things like interest on the public debt or payments under specific, quite rare private relief acts, which are sometimes exempt from apportionment. These allowances are essential, yes, but they must remain rare and clearly defined by law. If we were to expand these exceptions to cover, well, all functions the executive simply deemed efficient or vital, we would fatally erode the entire financial structure that's designed specifically to restrain overreach.
But the structure itself is the problem when it leads to paralysis.
The severity of the Anti-Deficiency Act's penalty structure is necessary precisely because it forces compliance and respect for legal boundaries. We willingly sacrifice perhaps a small degree of administrative flexibility to ensure that the ultimate power to tax and spend rests always with the representative body. That friction you lament, that is constitutional freedom in action.
Let's examine the very tools you claim demonstrate the executive's respect for these legislative boundaries. You point to apportionment.
Indeed, the executive's primary role is execution, and that execution is controlled through the same instruments of law. Apportionment is the perfect example. It specifies the exact amount of funds an agency may use, often broken down by time period, program, project, or activity. It ensures granularity and control. This complex web of limitations proves that even the highest office operates strictly within boundaries established by the law. It proves the enduring primacy of the deliberative body. These intricate checks are the very sinews of responsible, restrained government.
But that intricate guidance is itself the problem. The very need for massive documents like OMB Circular Note A11 detailing every microscopic step of budget execution, it just demonstrates that the legislative process has made the simple act of governing unnecessarily complex, perhaps deliberately so. It seems designed to be subject to political sabotage. The executive is forced to meticulously track every penny, every decision, every single object class code solely to avoid tripping over the wire of an Anti-Deficiency Act criminal violation.
To ensure legality.
This complexity is not a sign of strength or sophistication. It's a feature of legislative weakness and political gridlock. It seems designed to paralyze rather than empower effective state authority. Imagine running a critical agency, one responsible for public safety, and every few months you have to furlough your most experienced technical experts simply because a handful of legislators refuse to negotiate. That is not restraint. That is self-inflicted vulnerability.
As we head into the closing statements, I'm hearing that you both agree, I think, that the federal budgetary machinery is characterized by a web of complex rules. You both see detailed mechanisms like appropriations, apportionment, and the constant tracking of unobligated balances as all ostensibly designed to ensure accountability.
We agree the complexity is immense, yes, but we diverge entirely on its utility, its purpose.
Okay. Well, we'll just move into closing statements. Let's start with Mr. Franklin, and Emperor Napoleon I can have the last word.
I maintain that these structural checks and the resulting friction, even though they sometimes lead to an administrative lapse, a shutdown, are essential. They are essential for preventing financial overreach and for maintaining the necessary deliberative power of the citizens' representatives. My perspective demands prudence and fiscal integrity first, because without it, we risk a descent into financial ruin and executive dominance.
And I insist that prioritizing procedural purity and legislative scrutiny above all else, especially to the point of crippling state function, invites disorder and fundamentally undermines effective governance. The modern state requires continuous action, rapid decision-making. We cannot tolerate legislative gridlock that renders the administration impotent, particularly when public order and security demand decisive leadership.
Thank you. The listener then is left to weigh the costs and benefits, the value of structural checks designed to prevent overreach and maintain rigorous fiscal control, argued by Benjamin Franklin against the absolute imperative for administrative efficiency and continuous governmental action in the complex, often volatile, modern era as described by Emperor Napoleon I. If you want to learn more about Benjamin Franklin, Napoleon Bonaparte, or about government shutdowns, check out the History Speaks extras. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.